don't get how some of us get it. Animals, well, dogs specifically for this, and animals, and some of us feel the empathy and see the connection. And some people just don't at all. I don't understand that.
I know exactly where you're coming from. I was recently shown some footage by animal rights campaigners who are fighting against the fur trade, which is something I'm really keen to help with. There's only a couple of things I really powerfully dislike. I won't say I hate them, because I haven't got time to hate anything. I think it's a very destructive emotion, but I powerfully dislike fox hunting and the fur trade. And I've looked at lots of, animals being abused on behalf of that fur trade, but I'd never seen anything like the footage that they showed me. The shocking thing wasn't the piles of carcasses. It wasn't the pain and suffering that the animals were in. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of that. It was the people doing it with absolutely no conscience whatsoever. I mean, I looked at people who were effectively skinning animals alive, and I could see their faces, and I just couldn't countenance how they could do that and then presumably go home, cook themselves a meal, do their homework with their kids. I mean, it just doesn't compute. At what point in their development did things go wrong? Did they slip outside that part of their consciousness where having any degree of humanity vanished? It is, as you say, so difficult to understand, and watching it was horrific. But what scared me wasn't the pain, the suffering, the statistics, the vast numbers. Those are all things which we must campaign forcefully against. What scared me is precisely what you said. I didn't understand what would motivate those people to do those things. They were inhuman as far as I was concerned. They were
all too human. It's a terrible facet of our makeup, of humanity, that we are capable of that. We are capable of completely dissociating ourselves, that ability to cut ourselves off from brutality and from savagery, and to do it with impunity and neutrality, emotional neutrality. It's terribly dangerous.
It is, and obviously in our lifetimes, given the ages of our parents, we were brought up in the shadow of the spectre of the Second World War, where Nazism manifest all of those things. And again, the shocking thing I've discovered recently is that, in fact, amongst that cadre of people, there were very few, all men, a small cohort of intensely evil men who managed to motivate a nation to commit the most heinous crimes. And that ability to ignite that disconnection that you've spoken about is terrifying.
And there will be some people who will hear this and say, oh, don't be ridiculous. How can you equate that with that? Well, we're talking about the mental ability, the mental contortion that is possible to do it. It's exactly the same thing manifesting itself in both cases. You just said that you prefer dogs to humans, do you?
I mean, I have some fulfilling, and have had some fulfilling human relationships. There's no doubt about that. But are they, and have they been as intense as those relationships that I've had with other animals? I mean, people like myself, I have Asperger's syndrome, as it was known. It's been declassified now on that autistic spectrum. There's no grey in my world. There is only black and white. And as a consequence of that, I either love something or I very much don't love it. And I can't half do anything, because that's grey. So I can only wholly do something, which is black or white. So when I commit my emotional investment, it's 100%. Now, the difference is, when I've committed my emotional investment with other species, I've had 100% return. I can't put hand on heart and say that I've had 100% return from all of those human relationships that I've tried to invest maximally in. I'm not saying that they were in any way, I don't know, uh, it's striking a contrast between them and those relationships that you have with other species of animals is not something that's easy to do, and it's certainly not easy to verbalize because people will judge you inappropriately. But there is no doubt at all that my passion for those other animals has been incredibly intense, because I think of their total commitment and that total return of love and a desire to make sure that they live long and healthy and happy lives, all of the time. And there was nothing that I wouldn't do for them in order to satisfy those requirements. Nothing at all. I used to joke, throw myself in front of a train for those dogs. And I did financially, and I did in terms of my time commitment and everything else. I would move heaven and earth to make sure that they were happy on a daily basis. And that's enormously rewarding. The joy that they brought me, I called them my joy grenades, Itchy and Scratchy, because every time I took them out and I let them off their leads, they just exploded with a desire to revel in the world. And sometimes when I released the lead, I didn't feel like that. I felt that the world wasn't a terribly great place. But, they would just run for the sheer joy of running. And that would put a smile on my face. And I remember in some of the darkest moments taking them to a beach and letting them run in a completely deserted beach. And, dogs, they have a way of running which is smiling. And they just cantered over the sand. And it, for that moment, it was so completely uplifting that it probably saved my life. I just sort of thought, wow, look at that. They would just make me laugh out loud at nothing, like a child laughs at nothing. They would make me laugh at nothing because they were just so happy. That's a very powerful reward to have for an investment that you make in another species of animal. And it's one that, yes, you can get that. Of course, you can get that from human relationships, but not on demand always. And yet on demand, Itch and Scratch brought me absolutely unparalleled joy.
And you brought them unparalleled joy.
I did. I did everything I could for them. I shouted at Itchy once when he had completely muddied the back of my car on a very, very wet morning. But, oh God, we all did, Charlotte, my partner, Megan, my stepdaughter, and myself. We were totally devoted to those dogs. And now we've got Sid and Nancy, and it's beginning to go out, and of course it's there. We love them. The interesting thing is that when I lost Scratch, Charlotte and Megan were very keen to immediately get some relatives, as it turned out, of Itch and Scratch. And very coincidentally, as he was being euthanized here in the New Forest, they were being born at exactly the same time, and they were relatives. It was almost sort of cast in the stars. Do you know what? Obviously, the minute I got them, it was great. But it took me until lockdown this year, when they were a year old, and I was lying in bed one morning, and they were jumping around on the bed like they do. And I finally realized that it had taken a year for me to manifest anywhere near the amount of love that I had for Itchy and Scratchy. So that was great. That was a really good morning. And, good morning. I sort of thought, it's taken a year, and I've found that part of myself, which I know I'm secure, just securely giving to these other two animals, I sometimes feel guilty, actually, where other people are very enthusiastic about their dogs, as we are, and then when you get to meet their dog, they don't make the grade. They don't meet their sort of expectation. It's like it's the film that you've been described as being totally brilliant because it's won all the Oscars, but when you watch it, it doesn't quite tick your box.
Somebody says, oh, you've got to meet so and so. They're such a laugh. They're amazing. And you meet them, and they're not.
Yeah. And it can be like that with their dogs. They show you, you've seen all the pictures on their mobile phone, you've heard all of the stories, and you finally meet the dog. And as you say, yes, you might like it because we like dogs. We like being in that type of animal's company, but it lacks that point of total connection. And like you say, it is that subtle nuances. You can tell. I can tell whether from their smell whether my dog's been sleeping or not. And then you can tell what they're barking at by their bark. I mean, I think our foxes have how many calls did you tell me that our foxes make? 28. So red foxes have 28 different identified vocalizations.
Wow.
But and we naturalists would know quite a few of those. I confess to not knowing all of them. I've got to say I couldn't rack up a list of 28. But when it comes to the yaps and the whines and the barks of my dogs, I know exactly what they're doing and who's doing it and why. And that is a very effective form of personal communication.
A private language, in a sense, isn't it, between you and them?
It is. And again, that makes it so intensely personal and so therefore intensely special. I think that's what it is. I would always describe, I never considered myself as distinct. With Itch and Scratch, we were like a trinity. We were stronger together. We were happier together. We were more functional when we were together. And I lived in a partnership with them. I shared my space, my bed, my food, my time, plenty of my money, and an enormous commitment. And it did work as a perfectly balanced trinity, because everything I gave, they gave back, and coincidentally between each other. So, I mean, that's so special. And when it's totally reliable, when it's 100% cast iron reliable, unlike most human relationships, then surely it can't be beaten.
How did Scratch handle his brother? They were brothers, weren't they, going?
Yeah, there were two brothers. I mean, it was just agony watching it, really. We'd always feared the problem with two is that unless there's a terrible accident, then one's going to go before the other. And we'd all spent quite a lot of time thinking about how we were going to deal with that. He was never left on his own ever again. He was always in human company. Not for a minute after Itch went was he not with someone. We never ever left him again. So we went through lots of practical things to make sure he was settled. But there were two sad things. The first morning that I took him out into the woods on the route that we walked every day, he just kept stopping and looking over his shoulder. And he would just sit and wait for his brother. And that was desperately sad. But what was actually even more sad is when he stopped doing it, because I don't think you ever get over these things. You just remember less often. You don't ever forget. You remember less often any of those sorts of tragic losses. And it got to that point where he would remember less often, and he would come for a walk and he would only occasionally look back or look for his brother. And that was, because I never stopped looking back, but he did. So that was miserable. We always imagined that he'd been the underdog. He wasn't the dominant of the two. So we always thought that he might see that as an opportunity to get, first on the bed, first with the food, all those sorts of things. But it didn't manifest that way. But we still had a brilliant time with him. He developed cataracts. He'd had them for some time. He kept taking him to the vets, and they said, well, he's got them, but they're not bad enough yet. He can still see well, and we don't want to operate on them. Well, anyway, in the end, they escalated quite badly, and we took him to a specialist, a great friend of Charlotte's, and they did the cataract operation. I mean, when he came out and he could see again, he was 15 at that point, and he came out and it was like he was a 15-month-old puppy, and that was an extraordinary morning. And then we take him out to the woods, and all the time that he'd been sticking much closer, and he'd been a bit cautious and guarded because of his failing eyesight, that went. And so although he only had that ability to see again for a few months, I can't tell you how much joy that gave me. That made me incredibly happy. I
saw the video when you met, when when he came out. Was he 16? That's a good old age.
15 at that point. He died just short of his 16th birthday.
That's a bloody good age, isn't it? You know, I start to get worried now because at 12 and a half. And I also think about the relationship between the mother and the daughter, Misty and Maisie, because they're so close, and what that'll be like. But, you know, how many dogs have you had in your life then?
So we started with Max, the black miniature poodle, and he lived till 15, got him in 1980. It was a surprise. My mother went out one Sunday afternoon, and I'd gone round to my parents' house. I was sat there with my sister, and she came in and put this small black fluffy thing on the carpet, and we all sort of looked at one another and thought, my goodness me. And he, at that point, we were as close to a dysfunctional family as we could be. I was doing punk rock. My sister was investing all of her time in her, growing fashion designing skills. We were always very sort of didactic about our politics and outspoken. I'm quite confrontational. My father isn't. There were all sorts of interesting human relationships going on. But suffice to say that our dinner times, because I would continue to go back there for Sunday dinners whenever it was, I could, were lively affairs. And there were periods of time when we didn't speak to one another, but we still saw one another. But Max was a unifying force. He was like a super glue, because if we didn't have, much to share in terms of our opinions about Mrs. Thatcher, we all loved that dog so much that we had commonality there that would always draw us together. So we could have a flaming row about politics or world news, but by the time it got to dessert, we were all, happily telling Max anecdotes from that week. And he lived till he was 15. And then there was a gap for a while because losing Max was quite a blow. And then I got another black miniature poodle called Fish. And very sadly, he was run over just after his first birthday. Oof. And he died in my arms, and Megan and I took him into the garden, and that led to a very bad and bleak part of my life. The shock of it, and the way that it happened, and the bond that we'd already formed. We were already incredibly close, Fish and I, even after that year. And I think that having waited all that time after Max, to make that investment, somehow sort of found the courage to think, I'll do it again. To be robbed of it instantaneously after just a year was inordinately painful and incredibly destructive. So then time went on, and we got Itch and Scratch, and Itch and Scratch were just legends.
And my reliance on him actually is at its most intense when I spend a lot of time away. And if I see something on social media, some cruelty to animals, I mean, you see some terrible things, and it's very difficult to carry on with your day. I mean, it haunts me. I get haunted. And when I was something to an elephant or a great ape, some cruelty, some monstrous thing visited on them. And I get home, and it's almost like Max was saying everything's okay because he's an animal, and I'm then in touch with an animal. I'm in touch with my animal, and just the smell of his ears gives me that endorphin rush. And being with him, and he comes to me, and somehow he's my psychiatrist and social worker as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, we both expose ourselves to those sorts of cruelty on a constant basis because we campaign on behalf of those voiceless species, and it's tough. And I think people say, people who are exposed to all sorts of horrors, when you question them about it, they say, "Oh, you just get used to it," but you don't. There's always one little thing that's going to trip you up. And I can go for long periods of time looking at those things on social media, and I just see one thing, and it's just a leveler. It's like you've been shot yourself. I saw one last year. It was an elephant, actually. It was a piece of piece of social media with an elephant being shot. It was, and after everything that happened through the course of the year, all the campaigning, all the dead birds that I picked up, all the dead things that have been tied to my gate, all of the intimidation, all of the frustration of not making rapid progress with our campaigns, I just watched that 20-second clip, and it was, just paralyzed me completely. I can still see it now. It just runs in my mind. Unfortunately, memories are like gifts, aren't they? They just run in your mind. I'm never, ever going to escape that image now. I'm going to carry that. In a way, it fuels my determination. So it's probably a good thing that I saw it. It's probably a good thing that I have to constantly reconcile the pain that it causes me, because that pain is motivating. It strengthens my desire to right those wrongs.
I saw that elephant video as well. And it is overwhelming and enveloping. I'm sure it's the same one. Was it a couple of hunters, and does one of them sort of go, yeah. Or, yeah. What a
turns around and laughs.
What a worthless piece of shit. I know. You're encountering that stuff all the time. You've got to. It's a wall. You've got to find a wall of objectivity, haven't you? And it's sometimes tough to find that.
It is tough to find that. I mean, I always give myself calming moments. I try not to be reactive, because I need to be rational. And it's hard to be rational when you've just watched someone kill an elephant, turn around and laugh about it. I'll just give it time. So I get past that instant surge of confusion, anger, hatred. I need all of that to calm down, and then I can put together my side of the argument in a way which will be appropriate. The key thing is, we've got to win. We've got to stop it. We've got to do everything in our lifetimes, to move in that direction. And if we can't stop these things in our lifetimes, we have to build a platform for other people to take on that mantle, so that we are making progress, and they can stand on our shoulders, and others will stand on theirs. And in the end, it will finish. We will end it. And you have to be resolute about that. You can't let them get you down. You've got to, anything negative, whether it's something which comes in and shocks you like that, or if it's a relentless campaign of harassment and hate on social media, for me, I've got to turn that into a positive, creative force. I've got to use all of that anger as an energy for creative change. And sometimes I need to take my foot off the pedal, pull into the lay-by, just calm down for 10 minutes before I get back on that road, and head very firmly in a direction of progress when it comes to the welfare of animals and the environment. It's really, again, you go out and you're standing in a queue, you're walking through a street, and you see someone wearing a fur coat, or they've got a bit of fur on their coat, and I don't know.
I think people who get dogs and have dogs and fall in love with dogs start to understand the importance of animals in general. I think they're a gateway. They're a gateway drug. They're a gateway dog to people actually thinking, this is not all about us.
Yeah, that should be the case. And it should be certainly the case with young people. And again, you wonder what happens when you see these, images, people, a gang of youths kicking a hedgehog to death or something. What have they been missing? Did they not cup a hamster in the palm of their hands and look at its bright little black beady eyes, its twitching whiskers? Did they not nuzzle up to the nape of a pet rabbit? They didn't probably have that opportunity to engage and take those formative and very powerful connections with animals, with nature. And that's why you're right. It is it's a respect for other life, isn't it, really? A fundamental respect for other life. And from it should grow an understanding of our coexistence, necessary coexistence with other life, sometimes even a dependency on that other life. But certainly, a fully formed idea that this planet isn't about us. We are not independent from nature and all of those other animals and plants and fungi. We are intrinsically linked with it.
Do you believe the way your mind works and the way you see the world with autism gives you or helps you in this focus and helps you in this determination?
Yeah, and I think it does, because I think one of the traits is that, you know, people like myself have a very raw dislike for injustice. We don't like people getting away with things. We don't like lying. That really, really upsets us. We are compelled to tell the truth as we know and understand it at that point in time. There is no point in holding back from the truth. And that's probably why we expose ourselves sometimes by saying things that, you know, you shouldn't say. Well, if they're the truth, I think we should say them. The truth should out. So we don't bite our tongues. And this allows us to be quite forthright and, you know, and maybe didactic in the way that we communicate. But we do so with great good intention. And also we can only do so with 100% conviction. As I always say to people, you know, if you want your floor swept, I'm your man, because I will do it in a way which I will discover to be the most efficient and effective. And when you come back, there won't be a little bit of dust in the corner, because that means your floor won't have been swept. So when we approach a job, we mean to do it properly, and therefore we don't give in, and we don't like to compromise, because that isn't getting the job done properly. So I think in a sort of an activist or ambassadorial role, people with that sort of mental outlook can be quite useful. We're like the vanguard, you know, we're the, you know, so-called extremist. We'll go in and say it how it is, so that the more diplomatic fraternity behind us will have an easier ride, and maybe not be seen as extremist. And then the truth that they sue for, which can be positive, will be more easily found and established, because, if you like, we've broken down all the walls. The downside is, of course, that we get all the flack.
And you'll be doing this to your last breath, will you?
Yeah, I'll do it. So obviously, I have no choice. Absolutely no choice. I'm not entirely sure what I'll be doing, but, you know, there are so many, as you know, there's so many causes out there. But I mean, I sleep as little as possible. I work as hard as I can, and I try to learn as much as I can and improve all the time, you know, my methodology. Because for me, winning is never going to be about crossing a line and getting a cup. Winning is simply never giving up. And so I'm never going to give up. Rest assured.
Where would we be without dogs?
Well, this morning I was out in the woods, you know, and they were there, and it's sunny and it was quite hot. So the pace of the walk was a little bit slower than it can be. And it's really quiet at this time of year. Most of the birds have stopped singing, of course, in August. And the colours have all changed. But we were walking through that dappled light, you know, where their black pout goes grey to brilliant white. And then I sat down at a certain point, and they came up and sat alongside me, and their tongue was so brilliant candy pink against their ivory white teeth. They look so young at the moment, you know, Sid and Nancy. And we were in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else there, and the three of us were happy. Can't beat that.